Two white police officers laughing. A black woman in handcuffs pressed against a brick wall. Phones recording. A crowd watching. It looked like just another case of excessive force, another viral video waiting to happen. But what those officers didn't know, what the crowd didn't know, even the woman herself hadn't revealed yet, would turn this moment into a career-ending nightmare that would reach the highest levels of military command. Because the woman they were restraining with a chokehold while cameras captured her distress, she wasn't just another citizen they could dismiss. She was someone whose single phone call would shake the entire police department to its foundation and expose a system that had failed her long before those handcuffs clicked shut.
Brigadier General Naomi Carter had learned early in life that she would have to work twice as hard for half the recognition. Growing up in South Chicago, she'd watched her father, a Vietnam veteran, struggle to find work despite his service record. She'd seen her mother, a nurse, passed over for promotions in favor of less qualified colleagues. These weren't just family stories, they were the blueprint that shaped everything Naomi would become. At 17, when she walked into that Army recruitment office, the recruiter had actually laughed. "You sure you're in the right place, sweetheart?" he'd asked, barely looking up from his paperwork. She'd signed her name on the dotted line that day with a pen that felt heavy as iron, knowing every step forward would be a battle. 28 years later, Naomi had shattered every ceiling they'd placed above her head. She'd commanded troops in 3 combat zones. She'd earned 2 Bronze Stars and a Legion of Merit. She'd mentored hundreds of young soldiers, many of whom now held command positions themselves. At 45, she was one of only a handful of black women to achieve the rank of Brigadier General in the United States Army. But on this particular September morning, she wasn't wearing her uniform. She was wearing jeans, a Howard University sweatshirt, and exhaustion that came from 18 straight hours of travel. She'd just returned from a classified briefing in Germany and had taken a red-eye flight that landed at 4:47 a.m. Her official car and driver weren't scheduled to pick her up until 9 a.m. She'd told them not to bother with the early hour. She'd grab an Uber, go home, maybe catch a few hours of sleep before heading to the Pentagon. The coffee shop she ducked into was one of those generic 24-hour places that lined the commercial strip near the airport. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in that particular shade of tired that matched how she felt. The barista, a young woman with purple streaks in her hair, smiled genuinely when Naomi ordered. "Rough night?" she asked. "You have no idea," Naomi replied, managing a tired smile back. That's when Officer Bradley Vance and Officer Mitchell Dawson walked in. Naomi didn't pay them much attention initially. She'd spent her entire adult life around men in uniform. Their presence was background noise. She noticed them the way you notice furniture, present but unremarkable. She collected her coffee, black, no sugar, hot enough to feel dangerous, and turned toward the door. "Excuse me," Officer Vance called out. His voice had that particular tone Naomi had heard 1,000 times before, authority laced with something else, something sharp. She turned, waited. "We need to ask you some questions." Naomi glanced at her watch. 5:23 a.m. "About what, officer?" "There was a robbery about 2 blocks from here 20 minutes ago. Female suspect matches your description." The coffee shop went quiet. The barista stopped mid-pour. Another customer, a white man in a business suit, looked up from his phone, and Naomi felt something old and familiar settle into her bones. That particular exhaustion that had nothing to do with international flights and classified briefings. What description would that be? Her voice was level, calm, the same voice she'd used when artillery was raining down outside Kandahar. Black female, approximately 5'8", wearing casual clothing. Officer Dawson stepped forward now, his hand resting on his belt, near his weapon. "We're going to need to see some ID." Naomi could have ended it right there, could have explained who she was, but something stopped her. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was 28 years of swallowing these moments. Maybe it was the memory of her father, coming home defeated one too many times. "Am I being detained?" she asked instead. "We're conducting an investigation." "That's not what I asked. Am I being detained, or am I free to leave?" The air in that coffee shop changed. Officer Vance's jaw tightened. Officer Dawson's hand shifted on his belt. The man in the business suit quietly gathered his things and headed for the door. And Naomi filed that away, the way people disappeared when they sensed trouble coming for someone else. "Ma'am, if you don't cooperate, I asked a simple legal question, officer. Either you have reasonable suspicion to detain me, or I'm exercising my right to leave." What happened next would be captured on 6 different cell phone cameras, the coffee shop's security system, and the body cams both officers were wearing. But none of those cameras could capture what it felt like to be Naomi Carter in that moment, watching the officers' faces harden, watching them exchange a glance that spoke volumes, watching as Officer Vance reached for her arm. "Turn around, hands behind your back." On what grounds? Obstruction of justice, resisting investigation, turn around. Now.
The handcuffs clicked shut with a sound Naomi had heard hundreds of times in her career, usually when detaining insurgents or securing prisoners of war. Never once had she imagined she'd hear that sound locked around her own wrists. "This is unlawful detention," she said, her voice still controlled despite the adrenaline now flooding her system. "I've committed no crime. I've given you no reasonable suspicion." "Stop talking," Officer Vance interrupted, his grip tightening on her arm. "You've talked enough." Officer Dawson was already radioing in. "We've got a suspect in custody, black female, uncooperative, match description of robbery suspect, bringing her in." "I'm not a suspect," Naomi said, louder now. "You have no probable cause." "What you are," Officer Vance said, his face inches from hers as he pushed her toward the door, "is under arrest. And if you don't stop talking back, we'll add resisting arrest to the charges." Talking back. Those 2 words landed like a slap. Naomi had commanded soldiers through mortar fire. She'd negotiated with warlords and diplomats. She'd briefed members of Congress and NATO commanders. But in this moment, to these officers, she was just another black woman who needed to learn her place. Outside, the early morning air was cool against her face. The sky was that particular shade of pre-dawn gray where night hasn't quite surrendered to day. A few people were scattered along the street. Early morning joggers, a homeless man pushing a shopping cart, a woman walking her dog. They all stopped. They all stared. "You're hurting me," Naomi said as Officer Vance's grip dug into her arm. It wasn't a plea. It was a statement of fact. "Should have thought about that before you decided to rob somebody," Officer Dawson said, and then he laughed, actually laughed, "and before you decided to mouth off to police officers." That's when Naomi saw the phones come out, one by one like fireflies flickering to life. The joggers, the woman with the dog, even the homeless man. Everyone was recording now. In 2024, this was America's new town square. Instant justice, instant judgment, instant virality. But whose justice? Whose judgment? "Against the wall," Officer Vance commanded, pushing her toward the brick facade of the coffee shop. The rough surface scraped against her cheek as he positioned her. "Spread your legs." "This is excessive force," Naomi said, her voice strained now. The handcuffs were cutting into her wrists. The wall was cold and abrasive against her skin, and somewhere in the growing crowd, someone was streaming this live. "I haven't resisted. I haven't run. You have no legal justification." "Legal justification?" Officer Dawson moved in close, his voice low enough that only Naomi could hear it clearly, though the nearest phone was probably catching it. "The justification is you match a description. The justification is you refuse to cooperate. The justification is—" He didn't finish. Officer Vance had put his arm around Naomi's neck. Not quite a chokehold, but close enough to restrict her breathing. Close enough to send a message to everyone watching. This is what happens when you talk back. Naomi's training kicked in automatically. Don't escalate. Don't give them an excuse. Document everything. Remember details. But underneath that tactical thinking was something rawer. Rage, humiliation, and a grief so old it felt inherited. This was her father's story, her grandfather's story, the story of every black person who'd ever been told they looked suspicious, sounded aggressive, seemed threatening, appeared dangerous. "Can't breathe," she managed. The words that had become a rallying cry, a hashtag, a movement. Words that should have meant something by now, should have changed something by now. The crowd was growing, 20 people now, maybe more, all recording. But where most videos of police encounters showed bystanders shouting protests or interventions, this crowd was eerily divided. Half were filming in silent solidarity or vocal outrage. The other half, mostly white faces, were nodding along, some even voicing approval. "Shoulda just shown your ID," one man called out. "This is what happens when you don't cooperate." "She was resisting," a woman agreed. "They're just doing their jobs." A younger black man pushed to the front. "She wasn't resisting. I saw the whole thing. She just asked if she was being detained." "Stay back," Officer Dawson barked, his hand moving to his weapon. "All of you stay back or you'll be arrested for interfering with police business." The phones kept recording. The debate kept raging. And Naomi kept trying to breathe against the pressure on her throat, kept trying to maintain dignity while being displayed like a trophy catch, kept trying to remember that she was a Brigadier General in the United States Army, even though in this moment, to these officers, to half this crowd, she was nothing but a suspect who'd talked back. "Check her pockets," Officer Vance instructed his partner, finally releasing the pressure on Naomi's neck enough for her to gasp in air. "Let's see what we've got." Officer Dawson's hands were rough and invasive, patting down her jeans, reaching into her pockets. He pulled out her phone first, an encrypted military-grade device that should have been their first clue. Then her wallet, then her keys with the Pentagon security fob attached. He barely glanced at any of it. "No weapon," he reported, "just personal items." "Open the wallet," someone in the crowd shouted. "Check her ID." Dawson flipped it open. Naomi watched his face from her peripheral vision, watched for the moment recognition would dawn. Her military ID was right there, her rank, her clearance level, her official photo in dress uniform. But Dawson didn't look at it closely. He glanced at her driver's license, looked to her face, then back at the license. "ID checks out," he told his partner, "Naomi Carter. This address is across town, though. What are you doing in this neighborhood at 5 in the morning, Naomi?" The use of her first name, that casual disrespect, was deliberate. Another power play, another reminder of hierarchy. "I have the right to be anywhere in this country without justification. I also have the right to an attorney. I want to contact my legal counsel." "Legal counsel?" Officer Vance laughed again, and Officer Dawson joined in. Their laughter rang out across the street, captured on multiple devices, preserved for posterity. Two white officers laughing while a black woman stood handcuffed and humiliated. It was a scene as old as America itself. "You hear that, Mitch? She wants her lawyer, like she's some kind of VIP. "Ma'am, you're not getting a phone call until we process you at the station, and I'd suggest you drop the attitude. Judges don't take kindly to people who disrespect law enforcement." The patrol car pulled up then, its lights painting the scene in alternating red and blue. More phones appeared in windows above the street. A news van was turning the corner. Someone must have called it in. This was becoming a spectacle, a morality play with a script everyone knew by heart. "This is wrong," a black woman in scrubs, probably coming off a night shift at the hospital, pushed forward. "She hasn't done anything. Why are you treating her like this?" "Like what?" Officer Vance challenged. "Like a suspect who refused to cooperate? Like someone who obstructed an investigation?" "You didn't have an investigation," another voice shouted. "You had racial profiling." The crowd was getting agitated now, splitting further into factions. Some were chanting, "Let her go."
Others were defending the officers. And Naomi, still pressed against that brick wall, still handcuffed, and still trying to process that this was actually happening, made a decision. "My name," she said loudly, clearly, making sure every recording device caught it, "is Brigadier General Naomi Carter, United States Army. Serial number," she rattled off her service number, "and I am currently on active duty with security clearance that outranks everyone within a 50-mile radius. I demand to contact my command immediately." The words hung in the air like smoke after gunfire. Officer Vance stopped laughing. Officer Dawson's hand froze on his radio. The crowd went completely silent. And then Officer Vance's face hardened into something ugly. "I don't care if you're the Queen of England," he said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "You're under arrest, and making false claims about military rank is a federal offense. Congratulations, you just made this a lot worse for yourself." He shoved her toward the patrol car, harder now, angry now. Naomi's shoulder hit the car doorframe. Pain shot through her arm. More phones captured it. More witnesses saw it. But nobody intervened. Nobody could intervene, because the law, at least in this moment, was on the side of the officers with badges and guns, not the woman with handcuffs and accusations. As they pushed her into the back seat, as the door slammed shut, as the crowd continued to argue and film and debate, Naomi Carter closed her eyes and did something she hadn't done in combat, hadn't done through ambushes and firefights and impossible odds. She wondered if she was going to get out of this alive.
The back of a police cruiser smells like desperation and disinfectant. Naomi had transported plenty of detainees in her military career, but she'd never been on this side of the cage. The metal screen separating her from the officers felt like a prophecy. This was how the system worked, one side with power, one side without. The only question was which side you were born onto. Through the window, she could still see the crowd, still see the phones, still see the coffee shop where 15 minutes ago she'd been a free woman ordering coffee. Now she was a suspect, a statistic, another name that might trend on social media before disappearing into the algorithm's memory hole. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47, transporting suspect to Central Station for processing. Female, black, approximately 45 years old, charged with obstruction and making false official statements." False official statements. They'd actually added that charge for telling them who she was. Naomi's mind was racing through contingencies. She had memorized the direct line to the Pentagon's command center. She knew the emergency protocols. She knew that missing her scheduled briefing at 11 a.m. would trigger immediate concern. But that was 6 hours away. 6 hours in a system that had already decided what story it was telling about her. "You really shouldn't have lied about being military," Officer Vance called back from the driver's seat, his eyes finding hers in the rearview mirror. "That's stolen valor territory. Federal prosecutors love those cases." "I didn't lie," Naomi said. "Check my phone. Check my wallet. My military ID is—" "We checked your wallet. Driver's license, credit cards, no military ID. You want to keep going with this story?" Naomi's blood went cold. She'd watched them check her wallet. She'd seen Officer Dawson flip through it. But had she actually seen him look at both sides? The military ID was tucked in a separate compartment, deliberately hidden from casual observation, for security reasons. Had he even looked for it? "There's a secondary compartment," Naomi said, trying to keep her voice level. "Flip the—" "Lady, we're not playing games with you," Officer Vance snapped. "We checked. There's no military ID, which means you're either delusional or you're trying to intimidate us with fake credentials. Either way, it's not going well for you." The car turned onto a main road. Morning traffic was building now, people heading to work, to school, to lives that were continuing normally while Naomi's was being dismantled by the minute. Some of them glanced at the police car. Most looked away. That was the social contract, wasn't it? Look away. Assume guilt. Trust the uniform. At Central Station, they pulled into the covered bay where patrol cars delivered their cargo. The architecture of justice, concrete and fluorescent lights, and the smell of burnt coffee and photocopier toner. Naomi had been in military detention facilities on 3 continents. She'd inspected them, improved them, held people accountable for their operation. But this was different. This was American soil. This was supposed to be different. Officer Vance opened her door. "Out," he commanded. Naomi maneuvered awkwardly, her hands still cuffed behind her back, her shoulder throbbing from where she'd hit the car doorframe. As she stood, Officer Vance grabbed her arm again, the same bruising grip, and walked her toward the entrance. Inside the booking area was exactly what she expected. Scuffed floors, bulletproof glass, tired officers processing an assembly line of human misery. A drunk man arguing with a sergeant, a teenager crying on a bench, a woman in a business suit, on her phone, speaking rapid Spanish to someone who was probably a lawyer. "What do we got?" The desk sergeant, an older white man with a weather-beaten face and gray stubble, barely looked up from his computer. "Obstruction, false official statements, resisting investigation. Found her near the site of that convenience store robbery. Matched the description. Got belligerent when we tried to question her, then claimed she was some kind of general in the army." The desk sergeant looked up at that. His eyes found Naomi's face, traveled down to her Howard sweatshirt, her jeans, her running shoes. His expression didn't change. "That's right. You're a general. Brigadier General Naomi Carter, and I'm requesting to contact my command immediately. This is an unlawful detention, and every minute you hold me is a violation of—" Yeah, the sergeant interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. "Everyone's innocent, everyone's got connections, everyone's got rights." He turned to Officers Vance and Dawson. "Processor, regular protocol. She gets her phone call after fingerprints and photos." "I need to contact the Pentagon," Naomi said, louder now. "I'm expected at a classified briefing in 6 hours. My absence will trigger security protocols. This situation is going to escalate." "The Pentagon," the desk sergeant repeated, something like amusement flickering in his eyes. "Ma'am, I've been working this desk for 23 years. You know how many people have told me they work for the government, the CIA, the FBI? Hell, last month the guy swore he was best friends with the president. You all watch too many movies." Officers Vance and Dawson laughed. A few other officers in the area chuckled too. And Naomi felt something break inside her. Not her resolve, but her last hope that this would be resolved through reason. They'd already written the story. Black woman, suspicious behavior, resisting authority, making wild claims. The script was set. Her lines had already been written. They processed her like she was nobody. Fingerprints pressed onto the electronic scanner, her hands that had signed deployment orders and condolence letters. Photos taken from the front and side, her face that had briefed generals and senators. Personal items inventoried and locked away, including the phone that could have ended this with one call. "Can I see my military ID now?" Naomi asked the female officer, processing her belongings. "It's in my wallet, secondary compartment." The officer, Officer Rodriguez, according to her name tag, actually looked, actually opened the wallet fully, actually found the compartment. And there it was, Brigadier General Naomi Carter, active duty, security clearance level clearly marked. The officer's face went pale. "Oh, Jesus. Oh, no. Oh, no, no, no." She looked up at Naomi, then at the ID, then at the desk sergeant who was busy with another booking. Her hand started shaking. "You need to get your supervisor," Naomi said quietly, "right now, before this becomes an international incident." Officer Rodriguez nodded, unable to speak. She set the ID down carefully, like it might explode, and practically ran toward the back offices. She could see her through the glass partition, gesturing frantically at someone in a white shirt, a lieutenant or captain probably. She could see him shake his head dismissively at first. She could see Rodriguez thrust the ID toward him. She could see his expression change in real time from annoyance to confusion to horror. He looked through the glass at Naomi. Their eyes met, and Naomi saw him mouth a single word. Shit. The desk sergeant was being called over. Then Officers Vance and Dawson,
all of them crowding around that tiny military ID card like it was a bomb that had just started ticking. Their voices were muffled but rising. I caught fragments. Impossible. Check the wallet. Didn't see. Oh God, we handcuffed her. The Pentagon is going to... And then the captain, a man in his 50s, with the posture of someone who'd worked his way up through the ranks, walked toward Naomi. His face was ashen. His hands were trembling. "General Carter," he said, and the title sounded like a confession. "Ma'am, there's been a terrible mistake. A misunderstanding. We're going to release you immediately. If you'll just..." "No," Naomi said. The word stopped him mid-sentence. "You're not releasing me. You're going to complete this booking. You're going to process these charges," and then her voice dropped to something cold and surgical. "I'm going to make one phone call." The captain looked like he might be sick. "Ma'am, please. We can resolve this. We can make this right. You had your chance to make this right. You had dozens of chances. From the moment I asked if I was being detained, from the moment I told you who I was, from the moment you put your hands on me. This isn't a mistake. This is a choice. So now I'm making mine." She held up her cuffed hands. "Are you going to take these off, Captain? Or do I make my phone call wearing them?"
The phone call lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Naomi spoke calmly, clearly, directly to the Deputy Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, a 2-star general who'd been her mentor since she was a lieutenant. She explained her situation, her location, the charges, the treatment, the timeline. She answered his questions precisely. And when she finished, she said simply, "Sir, I'm requesting a full investigation under Article 138. Article 138, the military regulation allowing service members to seek redress against officers who have wronged them." Except Naomi wasn't complaining about an officer. She was complaining about an entire police department. And when a Brigadier General, with her security clearance, her combat record, and her connections made that request, it wasn't a complaint. It was a declaration of war. Within 30 minutes, the chief of police arrived personally. Within an hour, the mayor's office was involved. Within 2 hours, the FBI Civil Rights Division was opening an investigation. Within 4 hours, every major news network had the story, complete with all 6 cell phone videos from outside the coffee shop, showing officers Vance and Dawson laughing while restraining a woman whose identity they'd never bothered to verify. The videos went viral in the way only absolute injustice can. Millions of views, thousands of shares. Hashtag General Carter, trending worldwide. But beneath the hashtags and the hot takes was a question nobody wanted to answer. How many times had this happened to people who couldn't make a phone call to the Pentagon? Officers Bradley Vance and Mitchell Dawson were suspended immediately, pending investigation. Within 2 weeks, they both resigned under pressure. Their law enforcement careers effectively over. The desk sergeant took early retirement. The police department's procedures for detainment and identification were overhauled. Mandatory implicit bias training was instituted. Reforms were promised. Naomi testified before Congress 3 months later. The hearing room was packed. Media, activists, military brass, politicians grandstanding for cameras. They asked her to describe what happened, to explain what she felt, to help them understand. "What I felt," Naomi said, her voice steady in that chamber designed for important words, "is what millions of Black Americans feel every single day. I felt invisible, despite being visible. I felt criminalized, despite being innocent. I felt that my humanity was negotiable, based on someone else's assumptions about my skin color." She paused, looking directly at the cameras, knowing this testimony would be clipped and shared and studied. "But here's what makes my case different from thousands of others. I had power to fight back. I had connections to make that phone call. I had credentials that finally forced people to see me.
What about the black woman working 2 jobs who doesn't have those things? What about the black teenager who matches a description? What about the black man who asks if he's being detained? They don't get to call the Pentagon. Their stories don't end with investigations and reforms. They end with criminal records, or trauma, or worse. The room was silent. Even the politicians had stopped performing. My uniform didn't protect me that morning. My rank didn't protect me. My service didn't protect me. The only thing that eventually protected me was my ability to access power structures that most black Americans will never reach. And that's not justice. That's privilege. And I got a tiny taste of what life is like without it. She leaned forward, her hands folded on the table. So yes, what happened to me was wrong. And yes, those officers should face consequences. But if we stop there, if we treat this as one bad incident with one bad outcome, we're missing the entire point. The system worked exactly as designed. It worked for Officers Vance and Dawson right up until the moment they realized I had power. It works that way every single day for people who don't. The reforms that followed were more substantial than usual. Body camera policies were strengthened across multiple jurisdictions. Identification procedures were revised. Training programs were implemented. Committees were formed. Reports were written. Progress was measured. But 6 months after her testimony, Naomi watched a video of another black woman being detained in another city for another suspicious reason. Different faces, different circumstances, same story. And she understood with devastating clarity that systemic change doesn't come from one incident, one investigation, one hashtag, or one hearing. It comes from every single person who watches videos like those 6 cell phone recordings and asks, what would I have done? Would I have filmed and posted? Would I have spoken up? Would I have walked away like that man in the business suit who didn't want trouble? Would I have been one of the voices in the crowd saying she should have just cooperated? Naomi returned to full duty. She went back to briefings and command decisions and the weight of stars on her shoulders. But something had shifted. She'd always known racism existed, had lived it, fought it, survived it. But there was a difference between knowing systemic injustice intellectually and feeling it physically. Feeling the handcuffs, feeling the brick wall, feeling the laughter of men who had all the power and none of the accountability. A year later, at a conference on military diversity, a young black cadet asked her, "General Carter, after everything that happened, do you still believe in the system?" She thought about her father who'd served his country and couldn't find work, about the recruitment officer who laughed at a 17-year-old girl with dreams, about Officers Vance and Dawson, who never once questioned their assumptions, about the desk sergeant, who'd heard dozens of people claim they were important and learned to dismiss them all, about Officer Rodriguez, who found the ID and felt horror, but only after following orders. "I believe," she said finally, "in the people who fight to change the system. I believe in the woman in scrubs who stood up for me in that crowd. I believe in Officer Rodriguez, who actually looked for the truth. I believe in every person who watches an injustice and refuses to look away. The system didn't save me that morning. People did. Eventually." She paused, meeting the young cadet's eyes. "So don't ask if you should believe in the system. Ask what you're going to do to change it. Because belief without action is just hope, and hope without power is just a wish. And wishes don't stop handcuffs from clicking shut." The story of General Naomi Carter became a case study, a teaching moment, a reference point. But for Naomi herself, it remained something simpler and more painful. A reminder that no matter how much achievement, service, or sacrifice can fully protect you from a society that sometimes sees your skin color before it sees your humanity. 2 years after that morning outside the coffee shop, the brick wall where she'd been restrained was painted with a mural. A black woman in army uniform, stars on her shoulders, hands not in cuffs, but raised toward a sky full of possibility. Below it, a single line. See me, hear me, believe me. Tourists photograph it now. Activists reference it. Art critics analyze it. But sometimes, late at night, Naomi drives past it and remembers the weight of handcuffs, the sound of laughter, the feeling of being invisible in plain sight.